The therapeutic landscape stems from the paradigm of dis-ease and wholeness, which in geometry is the fracturing or compressed asymmetry of the individual and the restoring of wholeness. So in the diagnosis of disease, one looks for imbalances as an environmental pattern that move into an imbalance on an individual level. So for example, if you're surrounded by bullies who use mass, larger size, to dominate and extract something that they want, whether it's your misery or your body or your lunch money, the message of superior size being used to extract something has within it the message that you don't matter, only mass or power matters. And then there's the physical repercussions. If you go without your lunch money and you become malnourished, then you have, an asymmetry in the consumption of nourishment and bringing in of nourishment rather than the expenditure or energy consumed. And so there are a series of asymmetries that move to a concentration of imbalance that become toxic. And everything is on this continuum. You have the centered position and the optimal dose, and then you have the same substance in larger and larger doses and in or out of symmetry with something else that produce higher degrees of toxicity or restore symmetry. And so an example would be the acid-alkaline balance. So first of all, there's a dose of acid and a dose of alkaline in food substances that is good. That's the proportions, or the portion of food. And then you have the balance, how much of that is optimally acidic and how much of that is optimally alkaline. And then you have the toxicity levels. Extreme acidity and extreme alkaline becomes toxic. So you have the portion, you have the relative relationship of two continuums. You could do the same thing with salt or no salt, water or no water. And then you have the intensity of the extreme, the potency of the dose. And when an environment giving high doses of highly toxic acid will, wear out the body, etc. When you're trying to heal something, you have to understand the underlying pattern of influence that created the dis-ease by creating the asymmetry. And then you want to bring that back to some sense of center. Now, this happens financially. Financial disease is spending way more money than you're bringing in. But it can also be bringing in way more money than you're giving out when there are lots of useful things that could bring well-being with that money. You have various forms of social diseases, for example, being used and exploited as, a low-ranking individual to do all the dirty work in the group that only tolerates you because you're willing to do the things they don't want to do. You've got mental diseases, for example, the disease that says I am worthless creates pain and suffering, because as soon as you believe I am worthless, you stop taking care of your body, so your body deteriorates. As your body deteriorates, your pain level goes up. When you're worthless, you stop taking care of your future, so you don't invest in finances and retirement and stuff, and again, you create pain. So it is a disease to have the belief I am worthless. But it's also interesting to note in these diseases that there's a continuum of disease. For example, one of the things that goes on in bullying is that the bully tries to cow the victim into some form of submission and retaliates against any effort to defend oneself. And so the bully tries to hurt the victim. And the victim says, fuck off, I'm valuable, you're not going to bully me. But the bully has superior mass. The bully always picks someone much smaller than themselves because superior mass is a force of chemistry or a force in physics. It's a bowling ball and a pinball interact, and the pinball bounces off and the bowling ball continues on its trajectory. It's got superior mass. And so as the person says, you can't bully me, I'm valuable, and the bully pins their arms down and spits on them or starts slapping them, there's a feeling of helplessness and rage and humiliation because no one is advocating and protecting us, and there's this message of worthlessness. And the feeling of helplessness and worthlessness and rage and humiliation combined are a much more toxic dose of feelings. So a resigned passive worthlessness of I'm not worth anything and it's no big deal, there's no helplessness there, can be a step forward because it feels stable. Helplessness, the feeling of desperately wanting and needing something and being completely unable to do anything about it, and having a superior mass, a bully, a parental structure, a government, exert its force specifically to attack and emphasize the fact that your helplessness, your rage, etc., is the goal. I want to reduce you to your worst possible state. That's my intention. This is absolutely unbearable as human beings because it's a message of disconnection. Now, ironically, captors, bullies, and victims, kidnappers and prisoners do often develop an interesting, profound emotional bond because they're both sharing, they're both hosts to the underlying viruses of helplessness, terror, rage, fear, etc. Both of their survival and security is on the line in the participation in the act, and so there can be a certain resonance between the victim and the perpetrator. But the message of violation and perpetration is you have no value, you don't exist, and you don't belong to me, you don't matter. Because otherwise, why would you treat yourself? Why would your right hand attack your left hand and start cutting off the fingers if it understood you were part of one body? And what is healing and whole is to move in the direction of understanding that we are cells in an entire species that is a cell in the entire planet, that is a cell in the solar system and in the universe, that the microcosm is a fractal representation and is part of the macrocosm. Because this is ecological thinking, this is the underlying message of science, that there is a connection between every part of the universe and every other part of the universe. And that at that level, we are functioning in an ecological whole. And when someone abuses you specifically to intentionally cause pain and helplessness, what they're saying is you don't belong to the whole. And what they're also saying is neither do I. Because abuses and diseases are contagious, but you can't give someone a disease that you don't carry. And so it's a very deep disease that says you don't belong to the whole, because it's saying I don't either. and it's part of the phenomena in psychology where those who are excluded from the system, whatever it is, and feel like they don't belong, will act to destroy the system, in part by infecting it with the diseases that are outcast in the system. So if you understand that diagnosis is triangulating a pattern that reveals an imbalance, and then medicine is some activity of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, eating that restores balance in the context. And if you also understand that the diseases are multi-leveled co-infections in most cases, because our cult doesn't know how to prevent them and doesn't know how to heal them, so they often go deeper. You can imagine a leg bludgeoned to bits and then left untreated as if nothing had happened. This happens inside the psyche in the feminine terrain all the time. So a leg has been pulverized into bits, 5 or 6 bones shattered, blood everywhere. Infection starts to set in. As you walk on that leg, trying to pretend that it does, it isn't wounded, to comply with the cult dogma that says it's no big deal, those wounds start rupturing. Again, the fractures of bones may rupture veins, and then bacteria can set in. You can lose blood and thus lose consciousness. So a whole variety of diseases come from an original disease that is not treated. And so, this when you finally grasp the degree of disease enough to rebel against the system that caused it, because to a certain extent, when dealing with psychological issues, you are rebelling against the cult, which in its chauvinism is saying the inner world doesn't matter, only what's real and tangible. So if you can't see the scars on the outside, they're no big deal. They're just in your head, says the chauvinist, without understanding that chauvinism is just in your head. The head is a very, very powerful organizer for all conscious action on the planet, which is largely responsible for the well-being or lack of it on the planet. So let's look at the medicinal landscape that we're dealing with. And it's important to diagnose the emotional wounds and mental wounds. So mental wounds would be things like I'm worthless. Emotional wounds would be things like feeling incredibly small, feeling terrified, feeling alone, feeling unimportant, feeling insignificant. And if we diagnose the physical, financial, social, mental, and emotional wounds that are present, and also look at many of the challenges to giving medicine to these wounds, because, for example, in a chauvinistic abuse cult, where the feminine is shamed and undervalued and humiliated, let's say a teenage boy is raped by a Catholic priest. He feels humiliated, hurt, alone, uncertain, doesn't know what to do, angry, hatred, humiliated, uncertain, etc. Now, an intelligent culture provides a space for any boy to say, I don't know what the hell to do. I've been fucked by my priest. So then you would have a competent culture around that would say, oh, well, the data says this, and the data says this, and it's not your fault, and da-da-da, and do this. But in an abuse cult, if he does the obvious thing to heal that wound, he is then shamed, gossiped about, and humiliated, whereas the priest denies it. and now he's cast out of church. So now he has a new disease because some part of him believed that the church was right, so now he must be evil because he's cast out of church. Now he's got a faulty belief, plus the awareness that power matters more than the truth, because he told the truth, the priest had the power, and so he's now got a new belief, which is power is there to hurt me, which is a new level of disease, because if you believe that all power is there to hurt you, then you will avoid power. But power can also be used to help you in an intelligent cult. And some people are intelligent. And so you quickly, trying to fix one disease in a sick environment, you create multiple new diseases in that sick environment. And this is the tragedy of our age. So understanding that as a paradigm, what's some of the landscape of things that can be done? And let me start with massage. And you can do massage, wherever you are. You can do massage in Bali. You can do massage in Philippines. You can do massage in Thailand. When I learned that a good 100 or so hours of massage was very useful, and I understood that that's awkwardly scheduled, rigidly timed, somewhat sociopathically implemented, meaning in the United States, there's a tremendous emphasis on boundaries, and there's very little emphasis on warmth and transparency. It's a little bit of a joke. We all need to be seen, we all need to be known, and the cult does a very poor job of that. So rather than admit its failings, it sells discretion and distance and reserve and confidentiality and too personal as if they're virtues. So, oh, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have looked there. I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned this. I apologize for asking and seeing you, or I shouldn't have touched like this and this. And so there's the human need is for love and belonging. But given that our cult is highly dysfunctional in both of those areas, it has turned around and made a selling point of its dissociation, distance, and secrecy. In fact, your therapist's greatest virtue, according to the cult, is that they will never tell anyone what you told them, which means you will remain completely invisible throughout your entire life. None of the abusers abusing you will ever know how it affected you because your therapist won't tell them, and neither will you. And you turn invisibility into a virtue because you don't have the competency to empathically and competently respond to pain. So let's just hide the pain and pretend there's no issue. It's very, very difficult dealing with this in a Western culture. So I found that Thailand and Philippines do not have this obsession with dissociation, one. And two, their massage is 10 times cheaper. And three, which it's, when someone abuses you in a way that requires massive medical care and then walks away and pretends it didn't happen, you've got a massive medical bill that needs to be paid. And so if you can go to a place where the bill is 10% of what it is elsewhere, then that stops the physical disease becoming a financial disease where you've spent $10,000 while taking a few months off work to recover from the disease. That's very difficult. So massage is useful, particularly healing, empathic, energetic massage. And what I find is that a 2 to 3 hour massage in a very still and quiet place where I'm able to breathe, make sounds, make notes, etc., allows me to patiently digest and tolerate and process feelings that are too painful to tolerate and digest and process outside of the massage. So this is, for me, the purpose of massage. It can also be a sense of combating loneliness and dissociation. Because, for example, in Thailand and the Philippines, and to some degree in Bali as well, there's a much more feminine culture. Both the men and the women are much more gentle and soft. And that's an energy that can be equated with human kindness. And it's desperately needed during, intense messages of you don't matter and you're completely separate from everyone, because no one wants to deal with the issue. Another terrain in therapy is food, and so in the environment of overwhelming feelings, it can be useful to use food as an anesthetic, basically, to eat too much deliberately. So I did that. And it's less damaging than amphetamines or heroin or something like that. If you need a painkiller, is my point. And the other, a lot of it for me was just sitting with way too much to deal with. And so I wanted to take the edge off. And I don't abuse alcohol or, recreational drugs. So I found that swimming, high stimulation activities, massage, eating, motorcycling, etc., and sleep deprivation all took the edge off to a point where I could reflect on what I was dealing with. And so, good nourishing food can help balance the brain, can also be, an addictive substance to take the edge off. That is not as toxic as again, some other form of opiates or something like that. And then the other terrain that, of looking at is beauty, physical beauty. When you're dealing with incredible ugliness in human beings or in yourself, and you're in a very beautiful environment. Again, I love Thailand for this. And courtesy. When you've been treated with incredible insensitivity, being in a culture that is courteous. So culture is a medicine. And Thailand is my favorite cultural medicine for its empathy, its courtesy, its smile, its quality time, its slowness, its physical beauty. And at the same time, when this results in a 300% increase in well-being, the cost of being in Thailand is 300% less. I have more fun in an apartment in Thailand that costs $150 a month than I do in my $4,000 house. So $150 a month brings more well-being than $4,000 a month, and that's speaks to the beauty of Thai culture and its natural environment. And so culture, going to a location, massage, diet, stimulation of activity, doing something that I guess keeps you moving, so a certain amount of exercise, and that's beautiful. I also find that in Thailand I'm 10 times more free, and this results in there's not the hyper judgmental nature of the critical mind in Thailand compared to the United States. And so if I'm grief-stricken and don't want to move for 3 hours and just lay slumped in a restaurant seat, the Thai do everything they can to make you feel comfortable. In America, it's like, do you need anything? We need to move this. And they have no interest in what you're actually going through. And so one is made to feel like a burden constantly. Not so in Thailand. And so, there again, cultural medicine, a place where you can be yourself and have genuine kindness shown to you. Then you have family constellation therapy, which is a subset of therapies that can work with sexual abuse, trauma, and abuse and relational dynamics. I've noticed some noticeable benefits of that, as well as the limitations of the ethics of the therapists. I ultimately got concerned when there was no interest shown in protecting future victims of abuse from the Human Awareness Institute by the person that I chose as my constellation therapist. And it just seemed a little bit sick and a little bit too comfortable, because he was making money from me because another therapist had sexually abused me and psychically abused me. So if another therapist had done their job, I wouldn't be here. And we're dealing with professional abuse, which is generally a chronic state. So if you have a therapist that has any sense of ethics and decency and understands the statistics, they will participate in stopping the abuse of the original perpetrator, particularly if that's a professional therapist. But to my great dismay, it does not occur to an American therapist to do anything about the abuses of the other therapist. In fact, they get scared. And so you realize you're dealing with children in this domain, and that's not what you need. You're already regressed and feel like a terrified child. You don't need another child. You need a competent adult. And the therapist, when I asked one of them, why are you just standing by? I'd like you to advocate with me. He said, I'm scared of them. What you've described to me are people I'm scared of. So, sure, just leave your long-term therapeutic client to deal with the assholes you're too frightened to deal with, is the message, i.e. you don't matter. So this gets into the complications of some of these treatments, is our culture does not raise competent, ethical adults who know what they're doing in this domain. If you find 1 in 100, you're doing very well. But that means for the typical person who's often isolated around the abuse that they have to go through 99 rejections, miscommunications, defense systems, stupidities, being blamed, being attacked, etc., to find the one person who knows what they're doing, and in a frenetic cult like our own is too busy to do anything in many cases, or says it's not my problem, which is another form of dissociation from our shared cultural wound. So one of the things that's going to be the most helpful is reading all of the literature. Some of it's on YouTube. All of the stuff that I'm suggesting is on Audible, because it's by far the best way to digest material when you're feeling a bit scattered and can't read. And maybe you need to move your body to feel and move through all the feelings that you're dealing with as someone validates what you went through. There can be a lot of grief, and we're in a cult that shames the expression of intense emotion rather than repairs it and loves it. And so, going for walks, going on hot tubs, etc., listening to Audible is a good approach, because it will heal the insanity by giving you statistical data to correlate and validate a lot of your feelings. So reading, etc., heals the insanity. So do adults, but because there's going to be one adult per 99 regressed children, or I'm differentiating between grown-ups and adults, because adults, by definition, are the ones who know how to love, those who need love inside and out. You can have whatever biological age you want in the body, and if you've never had that modeled and been able to internalize it, you don't know how to love. You don't know how to be an adult. And so you've got constellation therapy with the possible co-infection emerging, that if you tell them about your abuse and they do nothing, you may get the message that the abuse doesn't matter and the next victim doesn't matter because you were before that the next victim. And the therapist is making money by healing disease. So if another therapist is creating disease for your therapist to earn money healing, if they really cut out and fix the cult problems around creating the disease in the first place, a lot of therapists would go out of business. And so there's an incentive, follow the money. A therapist has to take personal time, which means they make less money, to help advocate against another abusive therapist or authority figure, which takes time and money. And if they succeed in stopping the sexual abuse of the first therapist, then they get less work. And so, for whatever reason, it does not occur to American therapists when they hear about abuse from another one. They don't say, where's the evidence? Have you gone to the police? How can we help the next victim? Do you need support? They don't ask any of these questions. They just happily charge to validate the feelings, and they're quite comfortable coexisting with an abusive therapist up the road who's going to continue producing clients for them. I find that outrageous. But the therapists find it outrageous that I find that outrageous. And so now you're in a battle with your therapist in a regressed state who's, in a sense, protecting your other therapist, who's prioritizing their image and stuff over your needs. So you've got an endless message of worthlessness coming from people you're paying, which is a toxic situation. And so this is something to be, to be aware of. And so in a lot of these therapies, it would be a mixed blessing. They all take time, they all take vulnerability, they all take money. That's a definite downside. But the question is the therapy overall less toxic than the unhealthy aspects of the therapy is what it gets down to. And so, for example, I did like 4 or 5 sessions of constellation therapy in which there were some beneficial results. And it took time for the toxicity level to build up to us. Like, why are you not asking about helping the next victim? You're making money off of the malpractice of this therapist. And you know the psychological data that they're going to keep doing this. This is not a freak event for this amount of gross therapeutic negligence to occur. You don't have any interest in protecting the next victim? Even when you understand, perhaps more than I do, the amount of abuse? Why not? Because you become complicit, in my view. In other words, I don't want to fund an industry that covers up its own tracks at the expense of a client. That's fucked up. So that toxicity increases over time as there's no acknowledgement of the complicity with the abuse by the second therapist. So by the time that comes to a head, I then start to feel like it's toxic to pay money to people who are covering up my story and who are not willing to do anything about it. And the healing that occurred in that therapeutic container is, maybe 80% of what it's going to be. So I'm now going to rebel against this therapist and challenge them, etc. And so this, because if you don't, you're pretending that this is fine to live in a sociopathic culture. So all of these things are kind of in an unhealthy culture, medicine becomes toxicity very quick as imperfections come to light and the dosage is elevated of any one thing. And so you've got various things that you're working on healing, and it's kind of a cost-benefit analysis. You've got massage, constellation therapy. You've also got EMDR. And I did a good EMDR session with a good EMDR therapist. But then she started being very scattered in her schedule, and it was hard enough for me to open up to a new therapist without her being very flaky around the schedule, and I couldn't take the attachment disability around needing to have a secure container or nothing. She was not able to provide the secure container or grasp that deficit. And so it again felt shaming and humiliating. And so I bought a computer program with a little dot that goes back on my big 27-inch screen. You can also get phone apps. And you basically just focus on the event that you want to release the charge around and let your eyes follow the dots. Now, it is speculative as to why this works, but one of the clues comes in the close connection between eye movements and deeply emotional experiences, which you see in dreams. When someone is having a deeply emotional dream, their eyes are moving through a pattern as if they were physically seeing the object. When you remember an event, your eyes go through a pattern. They want to go through a reenactment of the connection between the brain and the eye movements. Now, when you think of the event and discipline your eyes to break that pattern, I believe it's an interruption of the brain patterning system. So that if your eyes learn to go like this, it kind of erases some of the memory in the traumatic centers of the brain. Because the eyes are not going like this and like this and like this. It's like re-recording the eye track, which ties in with some aspect of memory, and it seems like that releases the traumatic charge. So EMDR is a definite candidate. And you can buy an EMDR machine for $600. You can buy a computer program for $20. And you can buy app programs for free or for less than $10. And if you can put on a virtual reality goggles while you're doing the EMDR, that can be beneficial. Otherwise, you're looking at $100 an hour plus for EMDR therapy. And the therapist doesn't do as much as hold a safe container, which, as I said, in my case, the therapist didn't do by being erratically available, which again gave the message again that this horrific thing that I'm dealing with is not as important as their vacations and this and that and the other. It's just not a message you need to be receiving when you're going through the biggest emotional crisis of your life and aren't sure you're going to make it, to get that everyone else, including your therapist, has plenty of other things to do on their plate, and they'll get to you at some point. That in and of itself is a diseasing, is a painful, alienating message. So EMDR is valuable. Swimming in calm tropical water, being in a hot tub, taking hot baths, doing yoga, doing somatic, work, dancing, going out in nature, going boating. There's a variety of different things. I don't like the way our cult is so fixated on hiding the negative and actually shames people when they, when people meet me and say, "Hey, how you doing?" And I say, "I'm doing terrible." And they say, "Oh, okay, bye." It's just another message that I don't matter and that this cult doesn't know what it's doing. So why do I want to put myself through that? So sometimes I'll go out at night, 12, midnight, 4 a.m., whatever, and go out in nature and really enjoy the beauty of nature, because nature is sane. Cults are not sane, but nature is sane. And so there's none of this schizophrenic bullshit going on, because, those people are sleeping. And so that's a valuable thing, which brings me into sleep deprivation and sleep rotation. Induced jet lag is another way to look at it, as an anesthetic or a dulling. You kind of wake up and it feels very surreal. It feels like you're in a dream. But there isn't the driving pain of the full blistering heat of traumatic reality. And so in that more suspended place, there can be a little more creativity, a little bit more interest. And so there's definite value there. Mythology, fairy tales, work with the human shadow, diagnosing a cult. Diagnosing your cult, I think, is a very valuable thing, because the cult is always giving its inadequacy to the individuals in it. It's very important to understand that there was nothing wrong with those individuals at birth. All the defects that every individual carries were given to them by an abuse-based, ignorant cult. And the cult is not taking any responsibility. It's blaming its victims, because that's what shame-based abusers do. And so it's very valuable to give the energy back to the cult and acknowledge. The cult is fucked up here. It's statistically a certainty by measured statistics of what's happening, that this cult will produce large amounts of abuse, large amounts of victims who don't know how to stop the abuse, large amounts of bystanders who consider that it's not their problem, and large amounts of unconscious and helpless people that participate in this cycle of violation going on and on. An incompetent cult does do that, is doing that, and will continue to do that until it faces its incompetence at a cult level in every aspect. So that's going to be, one of the videos. So reading, diet, massage, swimming, jet lag, self-induced jet lag, family constellation therapy, certain amount of talk therapy, if you can find someone, who doesn't give the message of worthlessness in one way or another. Sex, orgasm can be medicinal in kind of the breakthrough chemical reset point in the body, whether through masturbation or with a partner. Very close cuddling and relational crying and healing, going into conscious regression and letting one adult be the parent in this dynamic. Reparenting is very, very healing. Guided meditation can be very healing depending on its message. Music can be very healing. Studying the terrain in general, whether it's YouTube videos or Audible, can be very instructive. Just giving oneself space to sleep and wake up when ready. Making videos like this can break the cycle of silence and secrecy. So this is some of the landscape. But keep in mind that you want to be medicating yourself with various things in response to what's there. So if you're feeling terrified, helpless, and unable to move, you could do a couple of things. You could find a nurturing parent who will help love the inner child to the point where it will release the consciousness back to the grown-up and larger consciousness. Or you could also do a rebel technique of doing the exact opposite, exposure therapy of confrontation, doing the very things you're afraid of. it depends on what will counterbalance the disease in the kindest and most efficient way.